and just the record button. And I'll just start out asking you a little bit about kind of where you got your start, what your childhood was like and your influences as a young person, and then we'll kind of move on to some of those other questions.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. So I'll pause for a second and then we'll start. And do you like to go by Dr. Diehl, or can I call you Amy? Like, I'll introduce you as a PhD in
Yeah.
the intro.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to say, Dr. Deal. You could ask, like, basically ask me that, and I'll say, no, Amy's fine.
Okay.
Like,
All right.
clear. But yeah, I think Amy's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Here we go. All right. Well, I am so excited to have you here on with me today, Dr. Diehl. Do you like to go by Dr. Diehl, or can we call each other Amy and Nancy?
You can use Amy and Nancy for the purpose of this. Yeah.
That sounds great.
We're your colleagues.
That sounds wonderful.
Yep.
Well, I always like to ask my guests a little bit about their childhood and what their upbringing was like, because I think it sheds a lot of light
Mhm.
on sort of what created them as a person and how they ended up where they were. So tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up as you.
Well, I love this question because it's one that I can't say that I've gotten frequently. But like I go back to my first, like one of my very first memories, which I think is a memory that really does like kind of shape the rest of my life. It's memory of sitting on my mother's lap when she says I was 2 years old. But I can remember, when I was a 3, 4, 5 year old, sitting on my mother's lap in the rocking chair. And what she would do is she would have a list. I can remember this very vividly. She would write a list of names, and it was like mommy, daddy. I have an Aunt Nancy, Aunt Rhoda, and Aunt Susie. And so she would write all these names, and I could read them. And she says I was like 2 years old at the time that I was reading these names. But I had just had this very vivid memory of that. And the reason that that's a key memory for me is because that from a young age, I really had a love of school and of academics and of learning. And that really was instilled in me from my mother. My mother was a first generation college student. Both of my parents grew up as farm families. They both came from, my dad had 6 siblings, and my mother had 7. And my mother, of the two, between my two parents, my mother was the only one to go to college. My grandfather on my dad's side actually had like some kind of a business associate's degree, but none of his children went to college. And my mother went as a first generation student, but the reason she was able to go was because she had done well in school and she got a scholarship. And that was the only reason she was able to go, because the farm family didn't have enough money they had all these kids behind her and didn't have enough money otherwise. So I was really fortunate in that I grew up, that I myself wasn't the first generation, that I had the benefit of my mother's love of learning. And she, at the time, back in it's supposed to be like the late 60s, 70s, women's choices were very constrained. And her choice was, teacher education, because women weren't doing a whole lot of things unless they were teachers or secretaries, nurses, right? So, so she chose teacher education, and actually she taught school for 1 year, and then she decided that wasn't the career for her. And it was after that she had me. And so I was the beneficiary of her college education and her, teacher education degree. So I grew up loving school, loving academics, and I grew up trying to excel in school. So my goal was always to get A's, and I ended up graduating as valedictorian at my high school, and that was like one of my most proudest achievements, because I was there I was competing with all these male students, the boys, and math and physics, and I hung right in there with them and beat them, in terms of the grade point average.
Right.
So yeah, so it was interesting. Then going on to college, I finished college up in went and studied computer science. I finished that up really quickly in 3 years. And I thought at that point, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I've got my college degree. But what I found was that I wasn't done. And I actually since then have gotten a master's of business administration, which I started right away after my undergraduate degree. And then I studied French as a bachelor's student for a bachelor's degree. Um, and then I went for a PhD in administration and leadership. So, so when you say about what shaped me, it really goes back to those earliest memories of being on my mother's lap and the learning and just being, I had such a, I guess, proficiency and I was always a high achieving student, and always, worked hard. Like I wasn't one who was, I was never in like the gifted program. In fact, I remember I took the gifted test at one point because I thought I should be with the gifted students. And I took the test and I didn't score well enough on it to become, to go into the gifted classes. And I was very, very disappointed at the time. But what I learned about myself was I may not be whatever that test said, I may not have had that score, but I was high achieving and I could succeed on my own merit and through my own hard work.
Absolutely. Clearly. I always love asking that question because you kind of get a peek into these women's lives and kind of what made them who they are. And sometimes it goes back even to the earliest memory that you even had as a
Yep.
child. So your role now as Associate Vice President and Chief Information Technology Officer at Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania, tell me from that perspective a little bit about what you do on the day-to-day and also your perspective on women leaders in higher education and how that fits in to diversity and also how adversity fits into that.
Sure. So I've been at Shippensburg University for 25 years. I started off as a network specialist, and I was back in the early days of the internet, and my job was to go around to all of the buildings and connect them to the internet, and install Ethernet cards into computers, and install a Netscape browser and an email software for all the faculty and staff, and I just remember really loved that first job that I had here because I got to know everybody and I got to open up to them a whole new world. And since then, over the past 25 years, I've worked my way up position by position until 2 years ago when I was promoted into the Chief Information Technology Officer role. So in that time, either I've done it or I've overseen it, all aspects of related to IT, information technology and higher ed. And so today my role really focuses on a few key areas. One is IT policy. Another one is IT security. I've got a passion for security and making sure that the data and the information that we collect here at the university is kept safe, and that our networks and our systems are protected. Infrastructure and strategy, IT strategy, and also I get involved with like things like audits when they come up. But it's been a long journey, and starting off, before I got this job, actually, I worked for 1 year in a for-profit, and in that time, and actually I had an internship there when I was a college student. So I did this internship, and then I went to work for a year in this for-profit. And at the time, I had when I had the internship, and then later when I returned to work there full time, I had two female bosses, two female managers. And I remember coming out of school, like coming out of my computer science degree, and I really didn't know like what you did with that. Like, what did you really like? It didn't like going through school. I learned how to program, but I didn't know how that translated into the working world, and I didn't really know like what I wanted to do. Like I just didn't know because I didn't have that experience. And so I watched these two women managers, and they both had Masters of Business Administration degrees, MBAs, and that's what drove me to like say, okay, I need to get an MBA too because that's what they have. But it gave me a sense of like, okay, I want to be a manager. Like, I don't want to just, not just, but I want to take what I know technically, but I also want to use it to lead and organize and help other people and, think more broadly and things like that. And so I was really lucky in that, my first experience out of college was these two female managers, because I don't know, I'm sure, I was always high achieving, so I'm sure I probably still would have wanted to, move up or whatever, but just having those role models was important, right?
And they were supportive, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. They were supportive. Yeah, both of them. Because coming to the university, when I came to the university, I had, it was very male dominated in the IT department. And we still obviously have more men than women. It's, you know, not, it's like many IT workplaces.
Mhm.
Um, but what I found as I was working my way up in those different roles, I started to realize that I was experiencing things that I didn't see the men around me experiencing.
Mhm.
And this was about the same time I decided to start a PhD program. And so I started to get really curious about and I'll give you an example. One of the examples is like I I had watched for a long time. I had a male boss, and I had watched him lead meetings, and I had watched him make decisions at times whenever the individuals in the like when he couldn't bring consensus in a meeting. Like I had
Mhm.
watched him like make a decision. Like so what would happen is they spend an hour talking about something, there wasn't consensus, and he would say, okay, we're going to go in this direction, and the group would say okay, and they follow. Okay, so fast forward, I get my chance to lead similar group, and I start leading the same way, right? Okay, we don't have consensus, let's go this way. Well, what I found was while my male boss added to his respect by asserting authority in that way, I lost
Mhm.
points with my staff, right? And
Interesting.
I started to wonder why. Like, why were they questioning me in a way that they weren't, they didn't question my male boss. So at that time, I started looking into what barriers did women face in leadership. And I
Right.
used my PhD program to really flesh that out. And like every paper that we had to do, I did it on the topic of gender barriers. And when I got to doing my dissertation, I chose a very closely related topic, which was how women leaders in higher education make meaning of adversity. And it was qualitative research. And I went and did face-to-face interviews with 26 women leaders in higher education. They were presidents and provosts and vice presidents. And I talked to them about what was their most significant adversity that they had
Mhm.
experienced, either personally or professionally, or both. And I really got a wealth of information out of that in terms of how do women, how do they lead, right? And what's different about our leadership and the way that we're perceived as compared as you know leading in a world that is, as we know, our institutions were created by men for men with men's needs in mind, really leading in a world that wasn't designed for them. And I came away from that with just a lot of information, like just a wealth of information that I would have never gotten if I hadn't gone and spent an hour or more each with 20,
Right.
26
Right.
women. It was just a phenomenal experience.
What would you answer if the question was posed to you?
What was my greatest adversity? Is that
Yeah.
um, well, let me think about that. At the time, I can tell you, at the time, I was going through a very, very challenging. It was personal. It was a very, very challenging dating relationship, and it was. And I even mentioned this in the dissertation just briefly to express my positionality. It was a verbally abusive relationship, and I couldn't make sense of it because I'd never been treated that poorly before in my life. I mean, sure, we've all got people that treat us, maybe not the way that we should be, but just never, and I just couldn't make sense of it. And I couldn't, figure out how I get myself into this and how did I get myself out of it. So at
Mhm.
the time, writing this dissertation, it was, I think most often people will choose topics that are personal to them, right? Or that they have got some kind of connection to. And, really I was trying to make sense of my own struggle at that time. And get through that. So I was able to extricate myself from that situation, thankfully, and have moved on into much better, healthy relationship. But at the time, that was because they just didn't make sense to me. I just didn't comprehend it because I didn't understand how or why somebody would treat a person that they supposedly loved in
Mhm.
such a bad way. You know.
Right.
Um,
Right. And you talk about how in your experience when you came to lead a meeting, it
mhm,
actually lost you points to kind
mhm,
of take a
mhm,
little bit more of a dominant hand. And who do you think plays a part in this? Is it just the leadership style? Is it the culture of the organization and how people receive this? What's your take on that?
Well, my take is that it's all like how we've been socialized, because it's, like I mentioned before, our institutions were made by men for men. It assumes that men are going to be leading, and it assumes that, men are the authority. And when men assert authority, well, that's just natural. When women are assumed to, through society, to take on these more supportive roles, right? And to not be the person that's, out there being, you know, you know, authoritative. What I found is that one of the things too that I love about working at university is that it is a very, very collaborative environment, much more so than I think a lot of other industries. And so, sort of the collaboration, like, I had to learn how to adjust my leadership so that it went the extra effort to make sure that everybody knew that their voices were heard and that their voices were respected. And that if we didn't come to, like, I try to bring everything to consensus, because that's sort of the easiest approach. But if you can't, then helping people to understand, well, when the decision isn't your way, making sure that they understand and feel comfortable that it's not that I didn't hear your perspective, but like, that's a whole lot. I mean, I think that's a better way to manage, actually, but it does take time. And that's something that my male boss can just go on to the next task or whatever, next project, right? And here I am, have to, make sure, everyone is but I think it's driven by society, and then, it's just what comes out of society, and then it's just replicated within organizations.
And I think it's kind of this two-pronged issue in that, when a woman is a leader as opposed to a man, you kind of have to take a look at your leadership style. It's not one size fits all, but simultaneously, clearly there's work to be done societally, culturally, within organizations as well, so that their individuals' reception of what their leaders are saying to them or talking with them about are received one way versus another, and how to kind of modulate how you respond to that. I think it takes a lot of introspection to understand why, and why you might respond to your manager, your leadership posing something to you in a certain way versus another, if it's a woman versus a man. So you're also working on a book on gender bias in the workplace. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So I'll skip back a little bit. After I finished my PhD and I had completed the dissertation on adversity, I had a part of that PhD in the discussion section where I talked about gender barriers. And so I had identified about 12 gender barriers through my dissertation, through the interviews that I had done. And I had written about them in the dissertation. And about a year later, I met at a conference, I met a woman. Her name is Dr. Leanne Jabinski from Biola University. And I found out that she had done a very similar dissertation. She had interviewed, I think it was 12 women in faith-based nonprofit organizations. And she had interviewed them about what challenges that they had experienced. So I meet her at this conference, and we start talking about our respective research. And I'm looking at women in higher education. She's looking at, interviewed women in religion. Like, you think they're very different organization types. Higher ed's often thought of as more liberal, progressive. Religion's thought of as very conservative. We started talking. We realized that our women's experiences were much more similar than what we would have initially expected. And so what we did from that was we took our two bodies of data and we, like our two dissertations and the interview data that we had, and we combined them, and we went looking for all the barriers that we could find. We had identified 27, and
Wow.
we published a journal article out of that. It's called Making the Invisible Visible. It is published with Human Resource Development Quarterly. So we identified these 27 barriers, and we, at the time, I had an organizing framework around them, which still exists. Obviously, it was, some of the barriers were at the societal level, some were at the organizational level, and then some were at the individual level. by the time I always knew that, like, I always thought that there had to be something, that's like a lot of things, right? Like there has to be something that ties these things together. Like what is it that's at the core, or like how do these things relate? Um, so from there, um, Leanne and I, we decided we wanted to work on a scale to measure gender bias. And we're not quantitative researchers, we're qualitative. So we had invited Dr. Amber Stevenson from Clarkson University and Dr. David Wong from Biola University to help us to create this scale. And so we created the scale. It was, we could go into scale development, but that would, it's not what I'm, don't want to get into the weeds of that. But anyway, we created this 47 item scale. But out of that scale creation, we did something called factor analysis. And it was through that factor analysis that we were able to draw down the 6 core factors, the 6 primary factors of gender bias. And so that's what the book is going to be about. So that's why I'm
interesting.
Getting around to what now the book, right? And so the factors are male privilege, disproportionate constraints, devaluation, insufficient support, hostility, and an acquiescence. And so those are like the big organizing factors. And then within each of those, we've got like the barriers or the sub factors that we're going to talk about in the book. And so what we're going to do with the book, or what we are doing with the book, and we're in the process of writing it, is using the data that we've already collected, plus we've got a few data sets from like social media data that was public data. And then also the other data that we've collected is just public articles on the internet, articles where, the blog posts or magazine articles where women have talked about their experiences. And so we're going to use all that. We are using all that data to talk about the 6 factors and how women have really experienced them. And then that's going to be the primary focus of the book. The end of the book is going to be, okay, what would an organization look like if it was equitable, if it was, free of the, discrimination and bias against women. And we're going to talk about how that organization would, like that ideal organization would look. Yeah.
I think that's going to be very deeply and widely influential, and something that is so badly needed right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that we always said when we started working together, Leanne and I, we kept saying, like there's all this work out there on gender bias, but they would talk about like these couple factors or these couple barriers or this couple, there was nothing that tied it all together. And we were trying to just be as comprehensive as we could at looking at the whole, like what is it that makes up gender bias? Because there was just nothing else out there that really looked at it in that way. Like, yeah, you've got terms like the glass ceiling, or the labyrinth or the sticky floor, you've got those terms. But even like you think about glass ceiling, like what does that really mean? Like, yeah, it means women go up so far and then they get stopped, or you've got the few that make it through, right?
Right.
But what is it really holding them back? And so we're trying to figure out like what is it that's holding them back? Because if you can't, until you can like name what's happening and like put labels to things, you can't really get rid of it until you can like identify it, right?
Right.
And I'll give you an example of one of the things that we actually put a label to, and we're doing this as part of the book. One of the things that often happens, and you'll see that I'm sure maybe this has happened to you even, is when a male in a professional setting is referred to it with a title is referred to as Dr. So-and-so, and the woman is in the same setting is referred to by her first name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's not really a name out. There's not really like a label out there for it.
I'm wondering what it's called. What do you call that?
So, we talked about this because okay, it's like omitting a title, right? Like that's kind of like describing it, but I'm like, there's not like a word for it. So the word we came up with was untitling, So, just basically just to be able to say, okay, hey, this woman was untitled, or, in her introduction or something like that, But yeah, so untitling is the label that we came up with, and I tweeted about it, so to put it out there, and every time I'm on Twitter a lot, and every time I put these concepts out or tweet out articles, I always get women saying, "Oh my gosh, this has happened to me,"
Absolutely.
And that would Go ahead.
I was going to say that happens a lot in medicine with the
Mhm,
physician doctor title, right? And I'm
mhm,
sure it happens in academics with with the PhD doctor title
mhm.
as well. And it's especially noticeable when you hold it up side by side. For example, there are some women colleagues I have that'll be in a practice where they're the only female, and one of the sales reps for the equipment will come by with a card for each of them, introducing themselves, trying to set up a meeting, and it'll say, "Dear Dr. So and so, Dr. So and so, Dr. So and so." And then you look at the woman's card and it's like, "Hey, Misty. Hiya,
Yep.
Misty." or whatever their first name is. And it's really pervasive. It's
Mhm,
all over.
I've experienced that myself, Dr. So and so and Amy.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
I, for the past 10 years, or not 10 years, 7 years, I've had a doctor title. And but people working at the same institution, people come to know you as your first name without the title, and so that it's like I don't blame anybody for I think a lot of those things, even the whole concept of gender bias, often it's just so unintentional.
Right,
But
unconscious.
right.
Yeah.
But the point is to make it visible, and so that people think and make it conscious, so that, hey, Dr. So and so and Dr. So and so,
Right.
um,
And I think I think in our times now there tends to be, shaming and cancel culture and everything. And I think
mhm,
that when somebody makes that misstep, I think you have to give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt and hope that it was unintentional, but I still think
yeah,
it's important to point it out. And just say,
yep,
"Hey, you probably didn't
yep,
mean this, but I noticed that you called all my colleagues doctor,
yep,
and in the professional setting, I also go by Dr. So and so." And
yep,
there's a way to do that with tact and kindness and
mhm,
not attack,
yep, yep.
in my opinion.
Yep, and
So,
anytime that we can act as a bystander when we see that happening to our colleague,
mhm,
that's helpful too, because it can be, when it happens to you, it can be, difficult to think in the moment. How do I address that with tact? I mean, I love your suggestion, and I love the idea of, unfortunately that we have to do this, but I love the idea of, like, being proactive and thinking about, okay, when this happens to me the next time, this is going to be my response. I mean, I hate that
right.
we have to do that, that we have to go to that extra step, but that's one very effective way to try to get someone to think twice the next time that they
And
do. And I'll give you another example. We've all made that mistake. I made that mistake
absolutely. Yeah.
within the past year or so. I remember I was talking to one of my female colleagues, and there were two consultants who were coming to our campus, and one was a man with a PhD. There was a woman with a PhD, and I said, "Oh, Doctor," I'm making up names, but Doctor Smith and Mary are coming to campus tomorrow." And as soon as I said it, I caught myself, and I said to my female
Mhm.
colleague, I just said, "Oh my gosh!" I said, "No, no." I said, "I should say I meant Doctor Smith and Doctor Jones," and so I called myself out on it.
Absolutely.
Which is, again, like, even I've studied this, I've written about it, but even it's all just so much in our subconscious because of how we were socialized, that
Right.
we all make that mistake, and
It,
so
it it takes active work, even
yeah,
even in as a woman, and even as a person in the minority. I think we all have to continue to work at this, even within ourselves.
yep,
So you, going back to just kind of your experience and growing up and being a high achiever, being a valedictorian. Sometimes in orthopedic surgery, and I'm sure in your field, both in IT as well as in leadership. Uh, you see women feeling like they have to shed some of their feminine qualities because maybe what they're doing is considered too girly, and it somehow
mhm,
invalidates how
mhm.
good or how smart they are. Did you ever see that? Did you ever feel that? And what was your experience in that area?
My experience is like I don't think it ever like I never really felt that it stopped me from doing anything that I was interested in doing. But it definitely prevented me from in even today, like coming to work, and those conversations that you have with your colleagues, before the meeting starts or in the hallway. I definitely have always felt like, well, there's certain things that I do that I don't like, why, like, I don't bring them up. Um pre-COVID, I had been, I go to the nail salon and get, basically it would take 2 hours every 3 or 4 weeks, right, to get my, my nails manicured, right? Like that's a significant way to spend a portion of a weekend,
Sure.
right? Timeline. But if somebody would ask me, what'd you do this weekend? Like I would never be like, oh, I went to the nail salon, and had this, this manicure or whatever. Like I just wouldn't, because speaking to the other people, and like it just doesn't, it doesn't relate. Even if there's other women in the room that clearly have gotten their, that have their, their nails done. Another example is like TV shows. Like I don't, like there's TV shows that I watch that I don't bring up in a conversation around work. I've got like what do you call it? I watch the show The Bachelor, right? And The
Hmm.
Bachelorette. And I watch it, I realize it's like, here I am, gender bias researcher, right? It's very, you watch it as like a hate watching kind of thing, or watch it from like a kind of societal thing. Like that's my
Right, right.
like how interesting it is, right? But because there's just so many examples of traditional gender roles and sexism and everything built into that show. But I would never come to work and say, oh, did you, I can talk about that. Whereas the guys, they're talking about, well, they watched the Super Bowl, or they watched the latest baseball game, or they watched, I don't know, whatever, like the whatever, science fiction show or whatever, that maybe doesn't interest me. So it's more like not hiding, but just not discussing, you
Hmm.
know, some of my interests in the workplace, because you feel like, yeah, that is feminine and that's not appropriate, or that's not going to be respected, if I bring it up. And in more recent years, I have talked about with some of my colleagues who I have a group of colleagues that, again, pre-COVID, we used to eat lunch together, and I've been more open with them about like, oh yeah, I watched this, The Bachelor or whatever, and they kind of, like laugh it off or whatever. But like I feel like it's like I hate that. Like I know a lot of women do feel that they have to hide parts of themselves, and especially women. Like I don't have children, but especially women with children often feel like they can't talk about their children, or that they will be perceived as if they are not fully committed to their
Right,
job. And I think
right.
that's just
It's unfortunate.
yeah.
It is unfortunate. We're mid-pandemic right now as we speak, and it's really come to the forefront that women are having to do double and triple duty, especially those who do
Mhm,
have kids,
mhm,
in keeping up their careers,
mhm,
maintaining those responsibilities, and now the shifting responsibility of homeschooling or supporting the homeschooling, and it just kind of falls by default upon women's shoulders. And I know a lot of women who are in relationships with men that where the men are very well meaning. It's equally important to them for their kids to have a good education, even while homeschooling, doing virtual school.
mhm,
But just by default, it tends to land more heavily on the women's shoulder,
mhm,
and it's just been a very, I think it's always been there, but I think the pandemic has just made it so much more obvious. What's your commentary on this, and what do we do about it? I think a
well,
lot of women are suffering
yeah. I know.
mentally because of it.
Yeah, like our supports were taken away, right? Like the child care in the school. School is to educate children, but it also functions as a child care,
Mhm.
for parents, as they work. They are going to work. The children are in school, and all of a sudden, the parents are having to, be working at home. Like they're in an office job, have to work from home, and also oversee while they're working, watch their kids or oversee their their online school. Um, I mean, I'm going to start from the beginning. I'll start for the people who aren't partnered up yet. Because one of the things is to choose your partner wisely,
Mhm.
and to set
Mhm.
expectations going into a certainly a long-term relationship, of the roles and the responsibilities that you're each going to take on. Um, I when I got married, my my before I got married, my husband and I, um, at the time we were engaged, we sat down and talked about, okay, we're going to be living together. How are we going to split up the duties in the house? How are we going to split up? Like we had this conversation, like you're going to do the sweeping, I'm going to do the dusting, just like to try to split everything up. As it's not so much that you're trying to be like, okay, exactly 50. 50-50, but you just wanted to feel like it's, both of you feel like it's equitable, right? And both of you
Right.
feel like you're taking things that you are more, that interest you more, that you know, would enjoy more, if that's, if that's possible. Like, I don't mind like cleaning the bathrooms, for example. Like
Mhm.
so that's,
Mhm.
that's part of my, responsibility. Um, and, sometimes like doing that cleaning is like a nice, like it's just like a nice task. It just makes you feel good that I've like, okay, I've cleaned the house. It's got to, you know, but like taking out the trash, it's like, I mean, maybe that's maybe we split those things in a traditional way, but
Right.
we had a conscious conversation about it. So my
I bet a
commentary,
lot. I'm sorry.
and no, I was just going to say my commentary on it is like, if you're not partnered up yet, just be wise in who you're choosing to partner with, and then having those conversations where you set expectations before you start coming into a like a living arrangement, together.
I
And
think too many people gloss over that part and they don't have the conversation until they're already partnered up and realize, oh, well, you don't want to take out the trash either.
yeah,
Neither do I.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really, really wise advice.
Yeah. And so I think it's definitely, tougher if you're in a relationship and you've already established these norms where, one person is doing more of the, heavy lifting or more certain types of work than another, then it's a matter of renegotiating. And I think like you shouldn't shy away from that. Hopefully your partner is, willing to sit down and have a conversation with you,
Hmm.
and, to help come to some kind of agreement or solution, or, and if not, then, couples counseling or whatever, right? To try to, because you want to make sure that, you know, women, especially just want to make sure that you're not being socked with all the, 80% of the workload. Well,
Right,
you know,
right. It's kind of it almost parallels the engaging into a work contract or taking a new
mhm,
job. You got to know what the expectations of that job are before you agree to take it on. And I think
right.
probably partnering up is in a personal way is really much the same thing.
Yeah, and I think we don't always think of it that way. Think about, Hollywood, The Bachelor. It's all about the romance, and like once you find this perfect person, then you get married and you live happily ever after. Well, that's where the work starts.
Right, right.
You know.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's like one really great piece of advice already, but I always like to ask my guests if they had one big piece of advice in the career realm
Mhm.
for a woman
Yeah,
who hopes to thrive in a male-dominated field, what would that one piece of advice be?
I'm glad you asked that question, because the big piece of advice I would have is know that everybody, especially every woman, is insecure to some degree. That was one thing I didn't know when I started out interviewing all these women leaders in higher education about adversity. I thought, okay, especially the presidents, I thought these women, they've really achieved, right? They're a university or college president. I'm like, they must be confident. What I found out talking to them about adversity was that quite a few of them were very insecure, actually.
Hmm.
And it made me feel better about myself, because I realized that they were no different than me, right? I certainly have my own insecurities, and for different things, right? They did too. But also we were alike in that they were high achieving. I'm high achieving too, right? And they didn't let their insecurities stop them. I
Hmm.
will say that, one of the other things I learned was that, through doing this research, was that, for women, it often takes external encouragement for them to be willing to apply for that next level, right? I remember
Right.
talking to one of the presidents, and this was one of the presidents who was especially had seemed to be dealing with more insecurity than some of the others, but and that was the result of some of the things she had gone through. But she had said, when she was a faculty member, she at her institution, she was like the ombudsman. Okay,
Hmm.
so she had a leadership role in faculty, and her president at the time came to her and she said, "Hey, I want you to be the interim provost." And this woman that I was talking to, let's say her name was Mary. Mary said, she said to the president, "I'm not big enough to do that. I can't, like that's not for me." And so the president was like, okay. So what ended up happening was the president encouraged her again, and then she talked to her husband, and her husband encouraged her, and so she went ahead and got into that interim provost role. But it took she advocated against herself at first,
Mm-hmm.
and then it took the encouragement of both the president and her husband for her to take that next leap, into a full-time administrative role in higher education. She then went on from that to serve in two different presidencies at two different institutions. And I was talking to her when I met with her. She was at her second institution as a president. But that's the biggest thing that I learned. That's why that's the biggest piece of advice. Just know that we all feel that way. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mm-hmm.
and just not to let that stop you, from pursuing your dreams. And it's definitely good to have that support network around you, so that if you do get opportunities, or when you're thinking of opportunities for yourself, you can go to your support network, and say, hey, what do you think about this? And just get that external encouragement, because we all need that, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, but just like I said, the biggest thing is just to know that even if when often people are very good at putting on a shell, a face, a confident face, because they need to, but know that inside that they are likely feeling just like you.
Right.
Um,
And that
and
helps. It's like that imposter syndrome, right? And I think one of the biggest hurdles that you can do in helping to manage it is to acknowledge that it's there, that it'll probably always be
yep,
there to some extent, but what we all need to learn is insecurity management skills, right?
yep.
You know it's there, but you know how to manage it.
Yeah, and the other little tip is to try to externalize it. I mean, and what I mean by that is, like, if you're feeling the fear, find somebody who's safe to talk to and verbalize it,
Hmm.
and you just get it out of you, so that it's not just like eating you up. You
Right.
externalize it, they're gonna then again, choosing your support network wisely, but externalize it and talk about it, so that it's not just contained in you, and then you can get a perspective on it.
Right.
Um,
You need that friend or that colleague who's willing to slap you around a little bit and just say, you know,
yeah,
cut it out. You're good enough for
yep,
this. Just
yep,
go for it.
yep, absolutely.
So
Yep.
I know that our listeners would love to keep up with what you're doing and look out for your book.
Mhm.
Where can our listeners find you online and find out more about the work that you do?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's Amy, Amy dash Diehl, Diehl. So my name, Amy dash Diehl. Make sure you have a dash, because somebody else had Amy Diehl without the dash. So it's amy-diehl.com. So that's my website, and I've got information in there about my publications, the talks that I've done, and my research. And then I'm also very active on Twitter. At Twitter, my handle is at Amy Diehl, no dash. It's AMYDIEHL. And I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm always tweeting out articles and interesting things I find related to gender bias, and workplace issues and things like that.
Wonderful. Well, it was a pleasure having you on. I really just enjoyed our conversation, learned a lot, and I really look forward to reading more about your work.
Thank you so much for having me, Nancy. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. All right.
All right, was that
Well, there we
good?
go. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you got me to talk about. I wasn't prepared for what is your biggest adversity?
Oh my God, I'm sorry. Try not to throw any throw any curveballs in there, but I think I like I like hearing about individuals' personal journeys as well, and
Yeah,
I definitely think it makes our guests just more relatable
yeah.
and I like mixing up a little bit of kind of the academic and the career part with a lot of the personal challenges too.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
think that's important too, because if you're just talking to someone, they're like, "Well, I went from this position to this position to this position, and blah blah blah." Blah. I always feel like, well, that I don't want to I want my experience to be like an encouragement to other people, that, like, if
Yeah,
I can do it, you can do it too. And
absolutely.
we all run into issues and challenges, and it's not always easy, but we can persevere, and keep going.
Absolutely.
See.
Absolutely. Well, I will keep you posted. This will be out sometime early next year. I'm still kind of working out the schedule and when season 3 is going to launch. I will send you some social media shareables. So I'll
Okay.
use your headshot and I'll have we'll pull some quotes from the interview, and those will be shareable, and would appreciate a share among your network.
Yep, I will.
And I will definitely be seeing you on Twitter, and I'll just keep you posted.
Okay, excellent. I'm so glad you do this. Is this like your side hobby or your
It's my passion project.
passion project? Yeah, yeah.
Something I've wanted to do for a long time. I'm also starting to work on a book soon. I actually just had my first meeting with my one of my editors, and so it's going to be kind of a spin-off off of this podcast. So I'm really excited about that as well.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Look
well,
forward
I'll
to
keep you
talking to you
posted.
about the ranks.
Hope you have a
Okay.
wonderful weekend. Take
Yeah,
care.
you
Stay
too.
safe. All
All
right.
right. Thanks
Bye-bye.
again. Bye.